But in this messy, cyclical history, there are moments in which the transcendent is bursting into our world, into our lives, and is giving us the promise or the possibility of breaking the spell. This video was made possible through the kind support of my sponsors over at Patreon. Patreon is a great way to help independent creators like myself produce original content. If you'd like to get more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much. Shalom everyone. The topic of our class today is trauma and faith. We're going to talk about trauma, healing from trauma, and the power, the role that faith plays in this process, in this journey. This parasha that we're reading this week, Parashat Beshalach, marks a transitional period, basically between the Exodus, which was described in the end of the previous parasha. The end of the previous parasha, was all about the final plagues, which led to the people of Israel coming out of Egypt. And the next parasha, Yitro, describes the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And this parasha is a very intense, many things going on, and it's all about going through this transitional period between these two events. Basically, between liberty, coming out from bondage and slavery to being free, to a state of finding our purpose. And it's not the same thing. And there's a time that passes between these two things. And this is a time of recovery, of healing, of digestion, of coming to terms with what happened from before we came out of bondage, and readjusting, finding our place again in this world, in life, and then finding our purpose. And we are actually witnessing this now in real time in our lives, in our world, with the hostages coming out. They've been for days and weeks and months and over a year and a half, in a kind of slavery, a kind of bondage, in captivity. And then they, one day, all of a sudden, in one instant, one moment, it ends, and they're outside. And this is the same thing that happened with the Israelites. All of a sudden, there was another plague and another plague. It's like the pulses of coming out. So you don't know if it's ending, if it doesn't. You're filled with hope, and then all of a sudden you're told, no, not yet. And Pharaoh is fickle and indecisive, and you don't know what's going on until all of a sudden you're told, this is really it. We're really coming out now. And then you find yourself on the outside. But it doesn't mean that you're free. It takes time. There's a process that you need to go through. You need to come to terms with what happened. You need to heal. You need to understand. You need to figure out how do you explain to yourself everything that happened. Some people formed even a relationship with their captors. And how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with all the residues and the memories and things that surface, take time to surface. They don't surface all of a sudden. So we don't know yet so much what's going on. We know from those who came back already that they come back and they start telling us a little bit of what the process, what the journey is like. And we see those that are coming back, they seem happy, they seem joyous, everything is wonderful, but we know that it can't be so simple. There's a certain psychological process of healing that they need to go through. So in a beautiful, beautiful way, this parasha embodies this process. And it's not a simple thing. There are many different things going on in this parasha that are all about this process of dealing with this newfound freedom. So just a quick list. So first we have the splitting of the Red Sea. It's not part of the Exodus. The Exodus already happened. And now they have to really leave. The Egyptians are chasing them. They're out of Egypt, but they're being chased by the Egyptians. Right? You thought you put it behind you. Not so simple. It haunts you. It comes to haunt you. It comes back. And then you have another miracle, another kind of plague, like an 11th kind of plague, that you need to, once again, you're not sure what's going to happen. There's a sea, you don't know how you're going to cross it. The sea opens, you cross, there's a miracle, they drown. We have a song of praise, the song of the sea, and we're out of that. After that, there's another moment. The other moment is that they come across the water. The water is bitter. The waters need to be sweetened. And then there's a promise of healing. The word healing. Anochi Hashem, Ani Hashem Rofecha. I am God, your healer. Is those words suddenly come into play, and then they reach like an oasis, which is a symbol of healing. And then they don't have food, and they don't have water, and they need to receive the manna from heaven and the slav, the meat. They get the meat in the evening, the bread in the morning, and then they get water out of the rock. And after that, finally, there's the war with Amalek. So many different things going on. And this period, these 3 parashot, right, the Bo, which we came out of, and now Beshalach, and now going into Yitro, we see it also in the Hebrew calendar. The previous parasha, Exodus, that's embodied in Passover. The Chag of Passover, that is growing out of the previous parasha. And the next parasha, which is about the giving of the Torah, that's embodied in Shavuot, the Festival of Weeks, the festival of the giving of the Torah. So what does this parasha stand for? This is like the counting of the Omer. The counting of the Omer, the 7 weeks, that's exactly the time that passes in this parasha. This parasha chronicles those original 7 weeks of the original counting of the Omer, which wasn't yet an agricultural thing, but it was a historical process. And we need to go through from being in a state that we have liberty, we're free, we don't have shackles, we don't have a master, we're free to go do, we think we're free to do whatever we want, and then finding our purpose, which is a totally different thing. Often it's described, these 2 stages, Passover and Shavuot, coming out of Egypt, and then receiving the Torah, as 2 levels, 2 kinds of liberty. One is called negative liberty, which means freedom from. I'm free from Egypt. I'm free from Pharaoh. I'm free from someone telling me what to do. I can go wherever I want. I can do whatever I want. I'm free. But this is negative freedom. It's external freedom. It's just freedom. That means I'm not being told what to do. I'm not coerced in any way. But then, Shavuot, the receiving of the Torah, the next parasha, this is called positive freedom. Positive freedom, or positive liberty, means the freedom to do something. And that's a totally different thing. Someone can be very free in the sense that no one is telling him what to do, and he can do whatever he wants, but then very easily one can become enslaved to this very freedom. You become enslaved to saying, oh, so I can do whatever I want, so I'm just going to do whatever comes into my head. Or I'm just going to be obsessed about surviving, or about, some people reach a certain hedonistic stage because they're so drunk with freedom that they feel that they're so excited that they can do whatever they want. They become addicted to this freedom, and then they're not free at all. They become slaves to the idea of freedom because it's the main thing in their head. The freedom to be something, someone, do something, it's a totally different thing. It's positive. You have a value that is not freedom itself. It's a value system. It's a goal. It's a purpose. It's a mission. And then the liberty, your freedom, becomes the means instead of the end goal. It becomes the means to fulfilling your goal. What is your goal? That's, for us, that's the Torah. Receiving the Torah is realizing we don't want a simple, flat kind of freedom. It's boring for us. We lose ourselves. We get lost. The whole story of this parasha is how the Jewish people are lost and confused when it's just freedom. But on the other hand, it's a process you have to go through. There was a reason we didn't get the Torah the day after we came out of Egypt. We could have gotten the Torah the day we came out of Egypt. But it's not so simple. We need those 7 weeks, which are a symbol for a transitional period, which has these 2 meanings. One is, like I said, healing, because they were actually physically wounded and broken, and with limbs broken, arms broken, legs broken from the slavery. It's not a state to receive the Torah, but of course it's also a psychological healing. And also another metaphor that's used in Chassidut is that in order to receive the Torah, or your purpose by extension, your own personal Torah, you're finding your letter in the Torah, it's the same thing, is you need vessels. You can't just be a released slave and then receive the Torah, because you're not built yet. There is what we call derech eretz kadma leTorah, basic human ethics or basic human behavior, being human, being a good person, being an adjusted person, a stable person. All this is a vessel for receiving the Torah. So we need those 7 weeks in order to regain our basic sense of humanity, our basic sense of being embodied and existing and being confident and being sure of ourselves and also taking a little bit that liberty for granted, not being drunk with the freedom. All this is in the background of this parasha, right? This is the journey that we need to go through as we're going through this journey. Now, there's a quote that I heard some time ago, and today I looked it up. It turns out that this quote is by a science fiction writer. I didn't know that. I thought it was something older. It sounds very profound, very ancient. It's very new. It's a writer. His name is G. Michael Hopf. Never read him. He writes apocalyptic novels, apparently. And the quote goes like this. He says, "Hard times create strong men." When there's when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So far, not a big chidush. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Because they're strong, they know what to do. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. And then it's an infinite circle. Okay, once again. So hard times create good men create good times create weak men because they get used to the goodness. And then those weak men, because they succumb to their weaknesses, to their flaws, to their base desires maybe, because everything is so permissible, so open, so free, there's a lot of abundance, they create bad times. And this is quoted, I think, often. I came across it several times in the past few months. I think it's quoted because many people believe that right now we are going through the good times create weak men, and we're beginning to see the weak men create bad times. Or we're afraid it's coming. And I think this is the reason it's quoted. Now we see this very beautifully in this parasha and in the history of Judaism, in the Tanakh, the Bible, several times. So first we see it like this. So what are the hard times? That's Egypt, that's the bondage, hard times. Very hard times, and the people are broken, and they're bitter, and they're working hard, and they don't see any hope. But then a strong man comes along, is born, it grows up, stands up. That's Moses, Moshe. And that we talked about this in 2 classes ago. That it's all about, the whole story of Shmot is about how can this strong masculine figure rise up and stand up to Pharaoh, basically. So he's the embodiment of the strong man who takes us out, and he brings us good times. Good times is liberty. And in this parasha, just like the time that we're living in now, that people are saying that they like this quote because of this, we see in this parasha that good times create weak men who complain, people who complain. And the complaining, which is going to be a recurring motif in the 40 years of the wilderness, is beginning in this parasha. They complain when they get to the Red Sea, they complain when they get to the bitter waters, they complain when there's no food, they complain when there's no water. And I'm sure they also complained when Amalek attacked them. They maybe just didn't have time to complain, they had to defend themselves. But and of course it's recurring again and again. And what happens at the end of this parasha, weak men create bad times, that's all the complaining. And Amalek is the bad time, Amalek attacking us, that's the bad time that is coming out of this weaknesses, this complaining. Because it's very explicitly said that because they doubted God in the incident just before Amalek, which was that they didn't believe they could have water, and they received water from the rock. But because they didn't believe, and they questioned whether God was truly among them or not truly among them, then that crack of doubt was exploited by Amalek, and then they were attacked. So weak men create bad times. But bad times create strong men again, and we see Moses becoming strong once again, yet again, with raising his arms. While Joshua is fighting, he has Aaron on one side, he has his nephew Hur on the other, and they're helping him, and he has to re-strengthen himself, and we see the process and the spiral or the cycle repeating itself. It doesn't end here. We know the most famous example is the Book of Judges. Book of Judges, exact same dynamic, exact same pattern again and again and again. They have a judge, a savior, he saves them, they get used to this new state of freedom, then they go to, they serve false idols, and then they get another enemy, they get another judge, and again and again and again and again. But in both cases, both here, when the cycle is just beginning, it's going to repeat several more times in the 40 years. But this is the first cycle. And once again, at the end of the Book of Judges, we see that there is an option for breaking the spell, breaking the spiral, and not letting it be forever an eternal loop, an eternal circle. How is the cycle broken in both cases? In this case, it's broken, basically, or an attempt is made, and for a moment it succeeds, of breaking it with the receiving of the Torah. When you are focusing on finding a transcendent purpose, a mission, you can come out of this dynamic, and you can reach a state in which you have both good times and strong men. That's basically it's the ideal, right? We need a combination of not only good men or strong men in bad times, and good times with weak men. We need somehow to be in a situation in which we have good times, and yet we don't deteriorate into taking it for granted, and only enjoying the material aspect of it, and then we become weak. The way to survive an age of plenty, an age of abundance, an age of prosperity, of economic prosperity, is to basically preserve within yourself the feeling that there's still, on the inside, there are still hard times. Even when it's good times, there are hard times in a very good sense. It's not hard on the outside, it's good times on the outside. But it's hard times in the sense if you want to focus on committing to your purpose and your goal, that's always hard, even when the times are good. And then focusing on that kind of work, on receiving the Torah, learning the Torah, it's an infinite journey, infinite progress. Even if the times are the best of times, and I have everything that I want, and I'm free, when I look up to Mount Sinai, and I see God calling me and telling me He wants me to be better and better. Now we have this song that it's going to be better and better and better. It's a very childish song, because I want things to be good for me. But what God is really saying, the inner lyrics of that song, it's an Israeli song, but it's like wild, is I want you to be better and better and better. That's really what He wants. That is a song of a little bit weak men. Weak men are saying, it's going to be better and better and better for me, and God loves me, and everything is, it's fun. It's nice to think that way, but it's going to weaken you over time. You're going to be very childish. And the way to come out of it is to say, God wants me to be better and better and better. And that's looking up to Mount Sinai. And then I can take the hardship of the time of the exile that is behind me, and I bring it with me into my life, and into a kind of life of being very present and being very on my toes, at the edge of my seat, at the edge of my comfort, and trying to become better and better. And then I can be a strong man in a good time, and find this balance. So in our parasha, it's the first cycle, and then it leads to standing at the foot of Mount Sinai, receiving the Torah, and the Torah is basically an invitation to say you don't have that sci-fi writer's description as realistic as it could be, and that's why everyone hears it to say, wow, that's a profound insight. It's a real thing. And we see that it's happening again and again in our history, in all of history. He was very, what's the word? Very, I thought of a simpler word. He was very perceptive, insightful. And he had a good insight, but still, it's like a curse. We don't want to succumb to this curse. We want to have a horizon of being able to break out of it. So this is the giving of the Torah. At the end of Judges, it's when they get a king. It's a similar dynamic. When they anoint a king, moving from Judges to the book of Kings, is also trying to move from a dynamic of putting our hopes in a judge, being rescued, lapsing back into idolatry, and again and again, into having a king. And a king is the same idea as the giving of the Torah. It's someone who embodies the transcendent. And he embodies this kind of demand and call to greatness. The king is there in order to illustrate greatness. I know there were many bad kings in history, including in our own history, but we started out, Saul started out good, and it didn't work, but then you had David. And David is not a perfect person, but he embodies this constant striving to be in touch, in direct touch with God, and being a constant Baal Tshuva, a constant repentant, a constant someone who's returning to God. And then again, it lapses back into the circle of history in the book of Kings as we proceed. Because again, it splits, and there are good kings and bad kings, and history is messy. But in this messy, cyclical history, there are moments in which the transcendent is bursting into our world, into our lives, and is giving us the promise or the possibility of breaking the spell of good times create weak men create bad times, and so on. Now, going back to what I said about the healing, because the two things are really somehow deeply connected. In order to get through the good times, right? Again, this parasha is the good times breeding weak men. That's the story of the parasha. We're out of Egypt, and yet there's all these problems. And the problems are because this liberty is somehow taken for granted, and we're very confused, and we're trying to sort ourselves out vis-a-vis this liberty, and then reaching finally the confrontation with Amalek, and once we go through that, getting to Mount Sinai, getting to the Torah. So there's something very, very beautiful that's going on in this parsha. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's something that I noticed. Actually, it was a friend, a relative of mine. He noticed that we did a chavruda on it, and it suddenly all fell into place in a beautiful way. That in this parasha, it actually begins at the end of the previous parasha, goes into this parasha. We see the 10 plagues echoing back in the reverse order. So we're going from the plague of the firstborn all the way to the plague of blood. They replay in a very, very subtle way. They replay in a rewound way, but they rewind and you go back over them. But this time as subtle positive events that help us get through these 7 weeks, this good time, which is really a hard time because we're complaining about it. And it goes like this. I'm going to say it very briefly, but some of it is very clear, some of it is a bit more subtle, has to do with the wording. The first one is, and before that I'll say something, why does this happen? So that's the biggest question, is why do we need to sort of retread the 10 plagues? The 10 plagues were for the Egyptians. They got 10 plagues, and we got out. But there's a beautiful Zohar that takes a verse from Isaiah. Isaiah says that when the plagues came, he says something very mysterious. He says they came nagof verafo, which means hit and heal. Hit and heal. And the Zohar says that the hitting, the plagues, the makot, that was for the Egyptians, but for the Jews there was a healing element. So the plagues weren't exactly only for the Egyptians. We were mixed up with the Egyptians. We had each Jew, each Israelite had an inner Egyptian within them, and the inner Egyptian goes along with them when they go outside. And also maybe that has to do with what we call now the Stockholm syndrome. Maybe they felt a little bad for the Egyptians. We know this in our people so much, that there are people who are, even when they're hit and when they're attacked and when there's an enemy and the enemy is cruel, there's a part of them that has a hard time. So the majority are singing a song of the sea when the Egyptians are drowning. But we know in our history and in our reality, there are people who are saying, how can we sing a song? And when there's a famous midrash that says that God rebuked the angels for being happy, so the Jews could sing, but those that are angels, and maybe Jews that think that they're angels, that want to be angels, they also had a hard time. Say, how can we sing a song? Egyptians are... We see this now with the people from Gaza going back to their wrecked buildings. It's a mixed feeling. On the other hand, you say, I don't feel sorry for them. It's on them. They did it to themselves. They caused it themselves. They made October 7th. But then there's another part that says, it's hard for me to see a man coming in and his house is destroyed. It's very confusing. So there's an element of, even after you're out of Egypt, the whole idea of this parasha is that when you're out of Egypt, Egypt isn't so easily out of you. And you need to go back to the 10 plagues, to go back to those moments that they broke the Egyptians, but they also cracked something inside you. And you need to go back and look at them, and in a way, you need to go through them in a very subtle way in order to heal, in order to get over the memory, in order to maybe realize that the Egyptians had to receive it, that maybe you also suffered a little bit and you had to go through this. Very interesting. So now I'll go over the list, and you see just a few examples. I'll list all of them, and I'll say a few words on some of them. So the first one is at the end of the previous parasha. Immediately after the plague of the killing of the firstborn in Egypt, we get a commandment, very mysterious. Why there? Why then? The commandment is that every firstborn that we have, both a man, a firstborn Jew, and an animal, has to be totally sanctified to Hashem. So the animals, they have to go to become sacrifices if it's the firstborn, or if it's a donkey, you don't sacrifice it, you sell it, you take the money. And the firstborn child, the firstborn boy of every Jewish family was destined originally to serve in the tabernacle, in the future tabernacle, which doesn't exist yet. And this is called the sanctifying of the elders. Later on, after the sin of the golden calf, it was changed, and the Levites replaced the elders. And to this day, we have the mitzvah of Pidyon Ben. We need to, every firstborn who's not a Levite or a Cohen, we need to do this little ritual in which we basically say that he's now exempt from serving in the temple, in the tabernacle, because it now belongs to the Levites. Because the original commandment is that every firstborn does this. Why does this happen immediately after the plague of the killing of the firstborn? Is because in a way we have to go through it a little bit ourselves. We have to also give up on our firstborn, but in a totally positive way. They're not dead, but we want to consecrate them, dedicate them, that they should go and serve, and in a way they become sort of selfless or nullified, or they get swallowed up by holiness in some way. They're going to serve in the tabernacle. In the end, it doesn't happen. We sort of buy them back. That's the whole mitzvah. It becomes for the Levites only. But the fact that it comes immediately after, that's the first sign that now we are going to retread backwards through the 10 plagues, and each one of them we're going to find a subtle way of experiencing them ourselves. That's the first one. The other 9 come in this parasha. That was at the end of the previous parasha, because it's adjacent. It's right next to the 10th plague. Then when we get to the Red Sea, the Egyptians are behind us, and then the pillar of cloud stands between us and them, and there's darkness again. And the darkness repeats. And here, actually, it's not so simple that it's us, because it says that it was dark on the Egyptian side, it was light on our side, a bit similar to how it was in the plague. But the fact that it's playing out again is once again this kind of mirror image. When the sea is split, the next moment, this repeats or echoes the plague of locust, arbe. Because in the plague of locust, it says that he took his staff and he leaned it, and then the wind came, and the wind brought the locust. And in the splitting of the Red Sea, again, he takes the staff, and the wind comes, and it's to say the eastern wind. It's the same phrase. The eastern wind that brought the locust, the eastern wind is splitting the Red Sea. When the Egyptians drown in the Red Sea, the words used that they're thrown down and they dive down, they fall, it's very similar to the plague of hail. The hail is falling down, and there's even a stronger similarity. We know that there's a famous question, how did they have any horses and carriages left to chase us with? Because the hail destroyed everything. All the animals died and all. So they say that there were some righteous Egyptians. And the righteous Egyptians, they believed that each plague was coming, and they rescued, they kept their animals, they kept them from the hail, they put them inside, they believed, they had fear of God. Pharaoh was crazy. Most of the Egyptians maybe were like him. But some of them, they believed. But at the end of the day, even those good Egyptians, they took their horses, they took their carriages, and they chased us. And they're the ones that drowned. So the drowning is full circle with the hail, because the hail was when they believed, and and from this we learn, again, a very tough, one of the toughest, maybe, sayings in the whole of the Talmud, is that in a state of war, even the good individuals in your enemy, you have to totally distrust them. You have to be very, very, because in a state of war, even the best of the people who were really good, they were God-fearing, they believed, that you could believe what they say. So this is, again, it's all different ways of coming to terms with what happened. Some of it, like the elder children, is that we have to identify a little bit with the Egyptians in some way. And another side of this is that we have to realize that the Egyptians, as much as we want to say that every nation, they have some good people, they have some bad people, but you have to realize that in a state of war, people get so ecstatic about the war and they fight you, you can't make that differentiation. And you need to maybe overcome a certain feeling of compassion that you may have, because it'll put you in risk, in danger. And we have stories from our war. We actually have the same story in Naama's family and in my own family, that from the War of Independence, that when they showed compassion in the middle of the war to a certain Arab individual, and it cost them dearly when they let that person go. It's a very confusing, it's part of coming to terms with the whole story. So there are many, many sides to this. Part of it is identifying with the Egyptians. Another part is saying, no, there's a limit to how you can identify with your enemy. Going on. So after that, we get to the sweeting of the water. The very fact that they come to bitter waters is in itself beautiful. We said that first the Egyptians come to haunt them, chase them, and they have to drown again. After that, they're ecstatic, they sing the song of the sea, everything is perfect, beautiful. The Egyptians are truly gone, truly behind them. Next day, 3 days later, they get to a place of water, the water is bitter. Where have we encountered bitterness recently? It says that the Egyptians embittered our lives. So basically this is saying, you may have come out of Egypt, but there's a sinking feeling of bitterness within you that you haven't gotten over yet, and now it's resurfacing. And the way to come to terms with this is, miraculously, Moses is taking a bitter piece of wood, throwing it into the water, and by some miracle, 2 bitters, 2 wrongs make a right, 2 negatives make a positive, and the 2 bitter elements come together into sweetness. So this is something that my wife taught me a few years ago, that it's a psychological symbol of validating the bitterness that you feel. You're saying, you're right, you are bitter, you have bitterness. It's not so easy to come out of Egypt. You don't get rid of it in a day. Your life was so embittered, it's going with you. And you have to validate, and that's the first stage to sweetening, is not fighting the bitterness, not saying, no, you don't feel, no, everything is wonderful. Sweetening with some, sugar coating it, as we say. Right? You don't sugarcoat. Not sugarcoating is validating the bitterness. Here it corresponds to the plague of boils. Why? Because in the boils, Moses picked up the dirt and threw it in the air, the soot, and the soot became it caused the plague of boils. And here he's again throwing something. He's throwing the piece of wood. It's not soot. It's wood into. That's not the most obvious of connections, but it fits in with the order. After that, very beautiful, we get to the devil, the pestilence. That's the illness. God said when he gave that plague, I'm going to give you all sorts of illnesses and pestilences. And now, after the healing of the sweetening of the water, God says, I am God, your healer, and I will heal you from all the illnesses of Egypt. So, again, perfect mirroring, perfect parallel. After that, we have the promise of giving meat in the evening and bread in the morning, and this corresponds to the arov, which is erev, in the evening. It's animals. There were animals, a mixture of animals attacking them. So here in the evening, they get meat that they can eat, and the one after that is the promise of the manna. The manna appears on the ground, and that parallels the bugs or the lice, the kinim. Within the word kinim, there's also the man there. Kinim is written without a yud there. You can see the man in the kinim. And then the fulfillment, when they do receive the manna bread and the slav, those birds, they rise from the ground, and it's exact same wording that was used for the frogs. When the frogs rise up and cover the land, you have the exact same words used for when the manna bread covers the land. It's like, it's a mirror image. Instead of frogs all over the land, you have this food all over the land. And it nourishes you. And again, the mirroring. And the final one is once again as explicit as the first one with the firstborn. When Moses comes to the rock to produce water, God tells him, take the staff that you used to turn the Nile River into blood and hit the rock with it. So the first plague of blood is now perfectly echoed in the final sweetening, or the final moment of healing. So that's just a beautiful thing that I should maybe add the list with all the details, maybe to the, I'll send it, I'll try to write it, I have it written in Hebrew, I'll translate it. But the most interesting thing comes now, because there's still one event that doesn't echo any of the plagues. We retreaded through the 10 plagues, and we healed from them, and we came to terms with everything that's going on, and then we still have the war with the Amalekites. So that must echo something that preceded even the plague of blood, meaning the slavery itself, the bondage itself, the essence of the bondage. The essence of the bondage has to do with losing faith in Hashem, in God, and forgetting Hashem. They got lost in Egypt, they got buried in Egypt, they got so deep into Egypt. It says that it was the 49th gate of impurity and almost near total forgetfulness. But they were saved at the nick of time. But now that they cleansed themselves of the 10 external shells or problems that they had to go through, that the plagues symbolized, and then the healing from the plagues, they have to come to terms with something far more profound and far more basic, is that we have this constant uncertainty that God is truly with us. And we have to come to terms with it. And this is where I said that the title in the beginning is trauma and faith, is where the element of faith comes in. The battle with Amalek, that's after the bringing of the water from the rock, and it's because there was also still doubt in that incident, that they didn't believe they could get water, that Amalek exploited that vulnerability, that open wound, that open crack of doubt, and stepped in Amalek is always a symbol of inner doubts that I can't really bring God into my life, into my heart, into my world. I'm a little bit in Egypt still. I'm still in Egypt. I don't find it, I can't really believe that he can be here with me. And going back to the current events, the hostages, I think we all got this week one of the most amazing, beautiful lessons in faith that I can remember in a long time, which is one of the hostages, a very young girl, 20-year-old girl. Her name is Agam Berger. She came back, and each one of them, when they're in the chopper, in the helicopter, taken back, they were given a whiteboard, and they would write a message for their families and for the people in Israel, because you can't hear anything in the chopper. And she wrote one of the most beautiful lines of faith that I've seen anyone phrase, and it was so beautiful and original and special and profound. And she wrote, I chose a path of faith, and by the path of faith I returned. B'derech emunah bacharti u'v'derech emunah shavti. In the path of faith I chose, that's the choice that I made, and by that path, through that power, I survived. And then we know stories that she did everything in her power to keep Shabbat, to observe Shabbat. That she wouldn't cook on Shabbat, she wouldn't do things on Shabbat that she wasn't supposed to do. And she refused, she was very adamant, and she wouldn't eat any unkosher food. They gave them meat, and she wouldn't take the meat. And she came back more pale than all the others, and she came back, but she was physically weaker, but she was spiritually unbelievably strong. And that was just a beautiful demonstration of how, above all the different little elements, psychological elements, and philosophical elements, and things you have to process, and things you have to go through, and things you have to understand, when you passed all that, when there are 10 plagues that the Egyptians got, or the Gazans got, and that you got because you were there as a slave, and then you go through all of it, and you're accounted, and maybe you write a diary, you write a journal, or whatever it is. At the end of all of this, after all this is over, you need something that it's what remains, under all the other things, which is the power of faith. And the way that Moses leads us into battle with Amalek is by doing something very simple. He raises his hands, and then he says, Vayehi yadav emunah, his hands were like faith, they were strong, and having faith is something similar, and a similar word in Hebrew. And he raises his hands, which is basically connecting to this super rational level or element within his soul, which is the element of faith. He's drawing down the forces. And so the 10 plagues, they correspond to our bodies and finally to our heads, and we go all over our body from top to bottom, from bottom to top, with the plagues and the healing from the plagues. But then at the end of the day, we need to raise our hands to something that's above. It's like the 11th level. It's above the plagues, it's above everything else. And we need to draw down this mysterious, power that we have, that we don't even understand it yet, but we have it. And we saw this young woman who could hold on to it in such an amazing way. It can inspire all of us. So this paves the way to finding our purpose, to receiving the Torah. When we're able to not just heal and adjust and come back to our being embodied. I think the food and the drink has to be feeling secure and confident and embodied. We go all through this, and then we have to connect to emunah, simple faith, that everything that happened to us was for the good. It all came from above. It was all meant to make us grow and make us learn. And now that we have that, we're truly complete, and we can receive the Torah and begin our lives.
Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, please press like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. If you want more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much, and see you in the next episode.